Hello everyone, and welcome to another session of entitled People Stories from Reddit. In this installment, a self-important lawyer, a true Karen, arrived at my ranch demanding I sign my property over to her. She asserted that I was too senile to recall granting her power of attorney. This turned out to be a massive error on her part. Let's get straight to the story. The tale begins this way. I am the owner of a ranch that has been in my possession for several decades. I was unaware that people composed or read stories on the internet, but my grandson suggested that this particular account might be of interest to others and is assisting me in writing it. He also explained the meaning of a Karen. My ranch is a fully operational property, complete with its own water source, barns, and land that my entire family, myself included, has cultivated. I am intimately familiar with every single inch of my ranch, much like the back of my hand. In fact, I know most of the town that way as well, its inhabitants and everything about it. They also seem to treat me with a great deal of respect. However, this Karen character appeared one day, presenting herself as a lawyer. She spouted some complex legal terminology that ultimately amounted to a claim that I was obligated to hand over my property to her. I may be getting on in years, but I am far from foolish. I informed her that I would not be signing anything concerning the ranch. She then launched into a tirade about possessing a legal power of attorney over me, which she claimed I couldn't remember due to dementia. To be perfectly clear, I do not have that condition, and my memory is, in fact, keener than that of many younger people. As I was alone at the house at the time, no one else witnessed her actions. I was certain that even if I did have dementia, I would entrust my daughter with my decision-making, not some lawyer I had never met. I requested several times that she leave, but she unequivocally refused. Instead, her agitation grew, and she pulled out a mobile phone to call the sheriff's office. I overheard her on the phone alleging that I had stolen property and was operating some form of criminal enterprise on the ranch. This was preposterous. I provide my horses with only the finest feed and sometimes take better care of them than I do of myself. I was no criminal. When the police arrived, they were unable to take any action. They began discussing it as a civil issue when Karen reiterated her demand for the property. She wanted the officers to place me under arrest. I imagine that if they had done so, the sheriff, an old acquaintance of mine, would have been shocked to see me brought in. Nevertheless, I'm grateful they chose not to arrest anyone and instead instructed Karen to vacate my property. But she returned. On her next visit, she was attempting to cordon off my land. My grandson alerted me, and I walked over to tell her to keep away. She responded by threatening lawsuits and a lien against my house, insisting once more that she was the rightful owner and that signing the property over would resolve everything. I suspect she was banking on me being elderly and disoriented. Perhaps this is a new type of scam targeting seniors, aiming to get them to sign away their property without fully comprehending their actions. Her persistence began to genuinely worry me, so I went to check the county records. I considered the possibility that she was related to a previous owner and had discovered some document indicating her ownership. The records, however, simply confirmed that I was the owner. Her actual name appeared nowhere. At that point, I was convinced this was merely a scam. Seeing her name absent from those county records was the moment I knew for certain she was all talk. But Karen wasn't finished. A few days later, I discovered orange fencing and flimsy stakes erected along one of my pastures. She was literally trying to fence off a portion of my land, as if she could claim it by sight alone. My grandson immediately took photographs, and I told him to keep them, having a premonition that we would need evidence later on. That same week, a notice arrived in the mail. Karen had actually filed some sort of lien against my property with the claim that I owed her money. My initial reaction was to laugh, but my grandson explained it was no joking matter. He said that whether fraudulent or not, such paperwork can complicate things at the county office if you ever try to sell or refinance. That's when I resolved to fight her intelligently, not just by shouting at her to leave. So, I contacted an old friend who was employed at the recorder's office and asked for his guidance on her filings. We examined them, and as expected, they were utter nonsense. They contained incorrect legal descriptions, forged signatures, and in one instance, she had literally written her own name where my deed number should have been. This wasn't just incorrect, it was criminal. With my grandson's assistance, we compiled a package of all the evidence: her fraudulent lien, the photos of her roping off my land, and a written statement detailing her false accusations to the police. We then took this package directly to the sheriff. His eyebrows shot up so high I thought they might fly off his head. He informed us that they would be initiating an investigation, as forgery and filing false documents with the county are felonies. Furthermore, he told me off the record that he was well aware I had owned the land for decades and was the legitimate owner. While this didn't have legal standing, it was reassuring to know the sheriff was on my side. However, my efforts didn't stop there. My grandson proposed that we submit a complaint to the State Bar Association. If she was indeed a lawyer, they would certainly be concerned about her misusing her license. We sent them copies of everything, though I didn't expect a swift resolution. Apparently, however, a lawyer attempting to fraudulently steal a senior's ranch gets prioritized. While it still took several months, my grandson assures me this is remarkably fast. About a month later, I received an official notification. The county had completely nullified her lien, and my deed was reaffirmed as solely mine. In addition, the sheriff's office was investigating her for fraud, and the state bar had imposed sanctions on her, pending a disbarment hearing. I hadn't even been certain she was a real lawyer, but the response from the bar confirmed she was. And, I suppose, not a very successful one if she had to resort to scamming people for money instead of being able to afford her own residence. I truly hope the hearing results in her losing her license to practice law permanently after such an abuse of power. News traveled fast around town. In small communities, people talk, and she already had a reputation for being pushy. Now, everyone knew she was dishonest. She went from strutting about as if she owned the place to lowering her head in the diner. The last I heard, she had packed her bags and left town after her law office was shut down. I even had people tell me they were unaware a law office ever existed there or that they had never seen a single client enter the premises. I suppose she just gave off a negative vibe to everyone. Perhaps she was too much of a city person, or maybe people just have a knack for sensing a bad apple, so to speak. As for me, I didn't have to do anything more than present the truth. I retained my ranch, my water rights, and my tranquility. My neighbors even stopped by to offer their congratulations. One of them remarked that all I did was supply the rope, she was the one who fashioned her own noose. So, yes, Karen believed she could outwit me with sophisticated language and fabricated documents, but instead, she lost her career and her good name. All because she chose the wrong rancher to challenge. I do feel concerned for others who might fall victim to similar scams, which is why I believe it's important to share this story. Just because individuals are older doesn't mean we can be easily manipulated. And indeed, folks, that Karen was utterly contemptible. I hope she is never permitted to practice law again. Exploiting elderly individuals is simply reprehensible. In any case, our next story comes from our malicious compliance and is titled, "Classmate is Angry I'm Making Her Eat Ethnic Food. Go eat a loaf of bread." This occurred about a year ago, during my time in high school. My calculus class was quite relaxed, with around 20 students who were all on friendly terms, a laid-back yet passionate teacher, and a manageable workload that allowed us to have some fun in class while still learning and performing well. At some point during the year, I developed a strong interest in cooking as a way to relieve stress. My family couldn't possibly consume all the food I prepared, so I began bringing the surplus to school and organizing Friday parties in my calculus class, with my teacher's permission, of course. I am Vietnamese and reside in a town that is predominantly white. This detail is significant only because it meant that most of the local kids were accustomed to American or European cuisine and not used to trying foods from other cultures. Last year, around the Lunar New Year, I decided to bring in some Vietnamese dishes to celebrate. This is a very significant time of year for my family, and I prepared some Vietnamese food, a steamed layer cake, and a traditional Vietnamese dessert. Some of my classmates found out I was bringing a traditional dish and decided to bring in traditional dishes from their own cultures, regardless of whether they celebrated the Lunar New Year. We ended up with a variety of Indian, Korean, Filipino, and Spanish desserts. It was wonderful, and I was thrilled that my friends wanted to join in the celebration with me. However, this apparently created a problem for one girl in my class. I would describe bonchung as an acquired taste, so I wasn't offended when not many people ate it. I understood that it wouldn't appeal to everyone, and there was plenty of other food available anyway. During our lunch break, a friend of mine who wasn't in our class but knew I had brought food overheard a girl from my class complaining about it while in the lunch line. She was apparently making very negative comments about how I made everyone eat strange Chinese food. Later that day, I sent her a text, simply stating that I heard she hadn't enjoyed the food and was curious as to why. I'm generally not bothered when people don't like my cooking. I make it for myself and bring in leftovers anyway. But her calling it weird Chinese food, when she knows I am Vietnamese, did not sit well with me. She replied via text, saying that it was inconsiderate of me to bring in weird ethnic foods that nobody but me would enjoy, and that I should have known better, given that most of the class was white. I responded that I bring food to share because I want to, and I have no duty to accommodate her specific preferences. I told her that if she had a problem with it, she simply didn't have to eat it, and that other people were welcome to bring in food as well. If she desired something more to her liking, she could bring it herself. Following that, she just told me that I should refrain from bringing in ethnic and foreign foods, and stick to American dishes because we are in America. Excuse me. What? I'd be willing to bet that if I brought in jambalaya, which has its roots in Louisiana, she would label it a weird foreign food. Fine. If she only wants to eat American food, then American food she shall have. The following week, I brought in a batch of oliebollen, a Dutch donut, and began distributing them at the start of class. When I reached her desk, I produced a loaf of Wonder Bread, placed it on her desk, and said, "Sorry, but these are Dutch, too ethnic. Here you go. All American cuisine." Later, she texted me demanding to know what my problem was. I explained that nearly every dish I had brought in that year was ethnic, and that I was annoyed she only took issue when the food wasn't European. She is entitled to her dislike of Asian foods, but if you're going to complain about it being ethnic, you should maintain that same standard when the ethnic food is white. And most importantly, do not label another person's culture as weird. She never complained about the food again. Also, before anyone comments, white bread is not the sole American cuisine. Here is a brief list of what I've enjoyed preparing so far: tater tots, jambalaya, fried chicken, various types of pies, s'mores, and Philly cheesesteaks. America is an incredibly diverse nation, and this is mirrored in its food. Happy eating. The next submission is a fantastic tale of petty revenge titled, "I Made My Food-Stealing Roommate Cause His Mom to Cry." This story dates back to 2013. I was residing in a large house with 5 roommates. One of them had a reputation for borrowing food, including costly items like meat, without ever replacing it. One day, I learned that his mother, who absolutely adored horses, was coming for a multi-day visit. So, I decided to set a trap for this roommate using horse meat. While not prevalent in the US, it is legal to purchase imported horse meat. I procured some quality thin cuts, sliced most of it, salted it, and stored it in a Tupperware container in the refrigerator, leaving the rest of the package with the horse meat store label in the freezer. As expected, that evening I discovered some of the horse meat was missing. In front of his mother, I made a big show of someone having stolen some of my horse meat. They both laughed, saying, "Har har, very funny. Sure, it's horse meat." My roommate then admitted to borrowing some meat to prepare steak and eggs for himself and his mom for breakfast, falsely promising to replace it. That's when I retrieved the package from the freezer, proving that it was, in fact, horse meat. His mother burst into tears, crying out to her son, "How could you feed me horses?" After that incident, he certainly stopped borrowing my meat. And now, let's proceed to the next story. It begins as follows. I own a pleasant 3-bedroom house situated on a large corner lot in a tranquil suburban neighborhood. When I initially moved here in the mid-80s, there was no homeowners association and few neighbors, as the area was still largely undeveloped. I acquired the entire plot of land for a relatively low price and then constructed the house mostly by myself. It was a nice, relaxed community where people generally kept to themselves but were friendly when you encountered them on the street. That all changed many years ago when a contingent of meddlesome neighbors concluded that we needed an HOA to protect property values and maintain community standards. From the very beginning, I wanted no involvement. I have always held the belief that a man's home is his castle, and I had no need for a group of petty authoritarians dictating the color of my shutters or the maximum height of my grass. When they first established the HOA, a couple of board members appeared at my door with their clipboards and insincere smiles, attempting to persuade me to join. No thanks, I stated firmly. I have no interest in joining. But Mr. Johnson, one of them said in a cloyingly sweet tone, don't you want a say in how our neighborhood is managed and to protect your property values? I simply shook my head and replied, my property values are doing just fine, and I already have a say. It's called participating in local elections and adhering to the existing laws. I don't require an additional layer of bureaucracy dictating what I can do with my own home. They made a few more attempts over the following year to change my mind, but I remained steadfast. Eventually, they appeared to relent and turned their attention to pestering other residents. I had no idea that this was merely the start of my conflicts with their HOA. Initially, the issues were minor annoyances. They would leave passive-aggressive notes on my door regarding my lawn being a quarter-inch too high or my holiday decorations not aligning with the neighborhood aesthetics. For the most part, I disregarded them, but it was aggravating. Then, their actions became more audacious. One summer afternoon, I returned home to discover a couple of HOA board members in my backyard, measuring my fence. "Excuse me," I said, approaching them. "What precisely do you think you're doing on my property?" The HOA president, Karen, yes, that was her actual name, turned to me with a contemptuous expression. "We are simply verifying that your fence complies with HOA guidelines. Section 3, paragraph 2, explicitly states that all fences must not exceed 6 feet in height." I could feel my blood pressure begin to climb. "First of all, I am not a member of your HOA, so your guidelines are not applicable to me. Second, this is my private property, and you are trespassing. Leave my yard immediately before I contact the police." Karen huffed with indignation. "Well, I never. We are simply trying to uphold standards here. Your lack of compliance is diminishing everyone's property values." "My property values are perfectly fine," I retorted. "Now get off my lawn before I demonstrate how we handle trespassers during my time in the military." That message seemed to finally register, and they scurried off, but I knew the matter was far from over. Over the subsequent years, the harassment persisted and even intensified. They would contact the city to report fabricated code violations. They attempted to have my project car, which I kept in my driveway, towed, asserting it was an eyesore. On one occasion, I even caught some of them trying to paint my mailbox to bring it into compliance while I was at work. Each time, I resisted by calling the police for trespassing, filing complaints with the city, and sending cease and desist letters. It was a draining battle, but I was determined not to let them intimidate me into joining their small circle of dictators. The situation finally reached a critical point last year. I had accepted a 6-month contract job overseas. The pay was excellent, but it required me to be away from home for a prolonged period. I had a friend house-sitting and checking on the property regularly, but he wasn't present on a daily basis. About 4 months into my contract, I received a frantic call from my house-sitter, Tom. "Dave, man, you are not going to believe this," he said, his voice filled with stress. "I stopped by to mow the lawn as usual, and there's construction happening in your backyard." I felt my stomach lurch. "What do you mean, construction?" Tom's tone was one of disbelief. "I mean, there are bulldozers, concrete mixers, and a full crew of workers building something back there on your property. It seems like they are installing a pool or something." I was momentarily speechless, trying to comprehend what he was describing. "Did you speak to anyone? Find out what's happening?" "Yeah, I tried," Tom answered. but they just stated they had all the necessary permits and told me to address any questions to the HOA. Dave, I think the HOA is building some sort of community pool on your land. A surge of fury washed over me. Those imbeciles had finally crossed the line. Tom, I need you to do a few things for me immediately, I said, striving to keep my voice calm. First, call the police and report this as trespassing and vandalism. Then, take numerous photos and videos of everything, the construction, any visible paperwork or permits, the workers, absolutely everything. Can you handle that for me? Yeah, of course, Tom affirmed. What are you going to do? I drew a deep breath. I'm booking the very next flight home. This is ending now. The following 24 hours were a chaotic mix of urgent travel plans, sleeplessness, and barely suppressed rage. By the time I finally pulled into my own driveway, I was operating solely on caffeine and righteous indignation. The situation in my backyard was even more dire than I had envisioned. A vast section of my lawn had been excavated, and the structure of what appeared to be a pool house was already being erected. Construction equipment and materials were scattered everywhere. I strode up to the first person I saw wearing a hard hat. Who is in charge here? I demanded. The worker appeared puzzled. Oh, that would be Mr. Stevens, the foreman. He's over in the white truck. I marched over to the truck and knocked firmly on the window. A middle-aged man with a thick mustache rolled it down. Can I help you? Yes, you can help me by telling me what in the hell you think you're doing on my property, I snarled. The foreman's brow creased. Your property? No, dude. This is HOA common land. We have all the required permits to construct the new community pool here. I felt my face flush with anger. I don't know what the HOA has told you, but this is absolutely not common or public land. This is my private property, which I have owned for over 30 years. You need to cease work immediately and remove your equipment from my land. Look, buddy, the foreman said, clearly irritated, I don't know what your issue is, but we have signed contracts and permits. If you have a problem, take it up with the HOA. I'm just here to do my job. I knew I wasn't going to make any headway with this man. Fine, but you will be hearing from my lawyer very shortly. I'd suggest you finish up here quickly. I turned and walked toward my car, pulling out my phone. I had some calls to make. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal activity. I retained the most aggressive property lawyer I could find, and we promptly filed for an emergency injunction to halt the construction. We also started compiling a massive lawsuit against the HOA, citing trespassing, property damage, fraud, and a host of other allegations. The HOA, predictably, attempted to argue that my property was, in fact, common public land that had been deeded to them years prior, but their supposed evidence was weak at best and transparently fabricated. They had forged documents, backdated contracts, the whole 9 yards. It was evident they had been orchestrating this for a long time, assuming they could succeed while I was abroad. The case progressed rapidly, largely due to the extensive evidence my house-sitter Tom had collected. The photos and videos unequivocally showed HOA members overseeing the construction on my land. We even possessed an audio recording of Karen, the HOA president, explicitly stating their intention to take care of their troublemaker Johnson once and for all. As the legal process continued, I discovered the full extent of the HOA's efforts to drive me out. For years, they had been spreading falsehoods about me to my neighbors, alleging I was operating a drug lab or was a convicted sex offender. They had made multiple attempts to have the city condemn my property based on false claims. The more information that was revealed, the more incensed the judge became. In the end, the outcome was not even a contest. The HOA's case completely crumbled under examination. The final judgment was delivered with force. The judge not only ruled in my favor on every point but took it a step further. The HOA was mandated to pay for all damages to my property and to bear the cost of removing the partially constructed pool house. They were assessed substantial punitive damages for their fraud and harassment. And in a particularly gratifying turn of events, the judge ordered the complete dissolution of the HOA, ruling that they had acted in bad faith and had abused their authority. As we departed the courthouse after the final hearing, my lawyer turned to me, grinning. In all my years of practice, I have never witnessed an HOA receive such a thorough dressing down. You've just made history, my friend. I couldn't suppress a smile. Well, they picked a fight with the wrong Marine. The period following the verdict was nearly as fulfilling as the legal victory itself. Karen and several other HOA board members faced multiple felony charges for fraud and forgery. The last I heard, she was looking at significant prison time. My property, meanwhile, was fully restored at the HOA's expense, and I used a portion of the settlement funds to install my own pool, situated perfectly so the former HOA members could see me enjoying it from their windows. However, the most rewarding aspect was the response from my neighbors. It turned out that many of them had been silently enduring the HOA's petty despotism for years but had been too intimidated to protest. Once the truth was exposed, I had people visiting for weeks to shake my hand and express their gratitude for standing up to them. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman named Ruth, even baked me a cake. She came over one afternoon with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I cannot express how thankful I am for what you've done. Seriously, those awful people fined me thousands of dollars over the years for the most trivial things, my flower beds, my bird feeders. I was worried I might lose my home. You are a hero." I was moved by her gratitude but simply shook my head. "I'm no hero. I just believe in confronting bullies. No one has the right to dictate what you do with your own property." These days, the neighborhood has returned to its peaceful state, just as it was when I first arrived all those years ago. People generally keep to themselves, but there's also a renewed sense of community. We now look out for one another, but without any overbearing rules or absurd fines. As for me, I am peacefully enjoying my retirement, tending to my garden, working on my project car, and yes, relaxing by my new pool. Occasionally, I'll see one of the former HOA busybodies glaring at me from down the street. I just give a wave and a smile. After all, I fought for this country to safeguard our freedoms. And sometimes, that fight begins right in your own backyard. And the next one is a humorous petty revenge story titled, "Poor Tim, the cheap $8 wine all day." So, I was tending bar at a VIP event and had to step away to the fridge to restock. I was gone for perhaps 45 seconds. In that brief interval, some self-important jerk went behind the bar, opened a bottle of expensive white wine, and poured himself 2 very large glasses. All the guests were aware they were not permitted to go behind or access the bar. It was an open bar featuring a lot of high-end wine. I made it my personal mission to ensure that every time he approached the bar for the remainder of the day, I served him Jacob's Creek, a notoriously cheap and unpleasant wine, no matter what he actually requested. It was my own private FU. And with that, folks, thank you for watching. Please remember to like the video, and I will see you again soon.